They were considered the finest soldiers Australia had ever produced, and then a single classified document overturned everything. There was no crushing defeat in combat, no devastating ambush, no enemy force capable of overpowering them. The force that shattered the legend of Australia's most elite unit was not a Taliban bullet. It was a 4-year government investigation that the Defense Ministry attempted to keep hidden from the public for as long as possible. When the findings were finally released, the silence across the country was overwhelming. These were operators so highly trained they could disappear into the mountains of Aruskin for 35 consecutive days without being seen, detected, or heard, surviving in the dirt without leaving a trace. Their entire philosophy centered on legendary long-range patrols, a method so ruthlessly effective that American generals openly admitted they had been approaching the war incorrectly for years, while the United States depended on helicopters and overwhelming firepower. The Australians relied on silence. They could remain perfectly still in the dust for 18 straight hours, collecting intelligence just 50 meters from Taliban commanders who had no idea they were under observation. They were like ghosts, yet the same culture of isolation and secrecy that made them so formidable ultimately led to the most explosive military scandal in continent Australian history. So consider this question: how does a unit rise to the absolute peak of invisible precision and then fall into controversy this dark? Behind official records, vehicle specifications, and the heroics of Operation Anaconda, there exists another story, rarely spoken aloud. By the end, the connection between their unseen battlefield tactics and the reason an entire nation was forced to reassess its most secret soldiers becomes clearing. The autumn of 2001, as the perimeter of Camp Rhino settled into uneasy quiet, Colonel Riley stood near makeshift barricades, staring into the Afghan darkness. The United States military had just established its first forward operating base in hostile territory. Riley had spent more than 20 years studying maneuver warfare logistics and modern combat doctrine. He understood patrol structures, safety protocols, and the protective umbrella of air support that normally accompanied Allied forces. What he had just witnessed defied all of it. 6 lightly armored Australian vehicles operating independently had driven beyond the wire and vanished into the night. When Riley asked a British liaison officer when the Australians were expected to return, he received an answer that sounded detached from modern military norms: 4 to 5 weeks, perhaps longer depending on terrain, and with minimal radio contact to avoid detection. Riley struggled to reconcile that time frame with his understanding of operational safety. In the American model, losing communication for even 24 hours could trigger a search and rescue effort. Yet these soldiers were deliberately disappearing for more than a month, with no quick reaction force waiting to extract them. This was not an error. It was a deliberate expression of the long-range patrol doctrine perfected long before the Middle East. American strategy at the dawn of the 21st century was built on shock and awe. Technology and overwhelming firepower were decisive. If a patrol identified the enemy satellites, tracked movements, armored columns, secured routes, and attack helicopters delivered payloads within minutes. The system was loud, rapid, and designed to compress engagements so tightly the enemy could not respond. Australians from the Special Air Service Regiment operated on inverted principles. Special Air Service Regiment had been shaped not by armored clashes of the Cold War, but by harsh environments where technology offered little advantage. Heavy armor could not pass, and calling air support often meant revealing one's position. Their warfare emphasized patience, avoiding contact and conducting missions that lasted weeks without firing a single shot. This philosophy began during the Malayan emergency of the 1950s. In dense, unforgiving jungle, conventional sweeps achieved little, so Australian teams reduced equipment, formed small autonomous patrols, and lived inside the jungle for weeks. They mastered zero acoustic footprint, moving slowly, communicating by hand signals, surviving without fires or rations that produced scent between 1963 and 1966. During the confrontation in Borneo, they conducted deeply classified cross-border patrols, isolated entirely from support. Survival depended on becoming indistinguishable from the terrain. Every breath, movement, and discarded item was treated as a liability. By the late 1960s in Vietnam, American forces relied on large-scale sweeps, artillery, and helicopters seeking decisive battles, Australians primarily operating in Phuoc. Two province inserted 5-man patrols using deceptive helicopter maneuvers before vanishing into vegetation. Their objective was rarely direct combat. A firefight was often considered a failure of stealth. Instead, they mapped supply routes, recorded troop movements, and observed patterns of life. Intelligence gathered silently was valued above short, chaotic engagements. Their undetected presence allowed precisely targeted strikes after safe withdrawal, disrupting enemy infrastructure without revealing the observers. According to records and veterans, this stealth earned them a fearsome reputation, proving patient information gathering was among the deadliest tools on a modern battlefield. In Afghanistan, during winter 2001, coalition technology struggled against geography. Satellites could not see inside caves nor distinguish civilians from combatants. Electronic surveillance faltered in regions reliant on face-to-face communication. The intelligence apparatus faced a mountainous blind spot. Only human eyes on the ground could fill it. Short reconnaissance missions offered snapshots, but not patterns. The SASR understood mapping a complex insurgent network required continuous observation over weeks. Villages needed monitoring long enough to distinguish residents from visitors. Mountain passes required sustained scrutiny to track supply caravans. This demanded carrying all necessities, leaving no trace. Enduring discomfort in maintaining psychological discipline. 6 vehicles, Riley observed, were not reckless. They were operating at peak specialization, carrying enough supplies for 30 days. Vehicles were modified for stealth, endurance, and terrain traversal. Not heavy armor. Radio silence served as protection when the 1st Sasri Squadron arrived at Camp Rhino in late 2001, ahead of most coalition forces. They unloaded long-range patrol vehicles, platforms engineered for autonomy rather than armor. They carried aviation fuel, rations, weapons, and water for journeys exceeding 1,000 kilometers. But no protective plating. Doctrine held that armor created false security, slowing escape, while speed and invisibility ensured survival. These patrols ventured hundreds of kilometers into Taliban-controlled valleys, remaining for 4 to 6 weeks. Vehicles were concealed as supply caches, while operators advanced on foot with packs weighing up to 60 kilograms from 2005 to 2013. Declassified records reveal operators established observation posts just 50 meters from fortified enemy positions for weeks. Undetected at that range, they could see faces, hear conversations, and smell cooking fire. Survival required moving 800 meters over an entire night, checking each inch of ground by hand. Absolute stillness during daylight. No stretching, no repositioning, even under pain. Hydration through tubes. Food consumed cold at night. Waste sealed and stored to leave no trace. Local shepherds and livestock posed greater risk than armed fighters. A goat stepping on a hidden operator or a dog detecting scent could trigger catastrophe. Operators endured by controlling breathing and trusting camouflage. Tension between this slow, deliberate method and conventional high-speed doctrine surfaced during planning for Operation Anaconda in March 2002. Intelligence indicated heavy enemy concentration in the Shah-e-Khat Valley. American command planned rapid helicopter insertion. Australians recommended 2 weeks of silent infiltration to map heavy weapons first. The proposal was rejected as too slow. When helicopters entered the valley, they encountered fortified positions, heavy machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and anti-aircraft fire. 2 CH-47 Chinooks were badly damaged, and an MH-47 was shot down. 7 American servicemen died, and a planned 3-day mission extended to 17 saucer teams. Positioned on high ridges called precision airstrikes for 2 weeks, validating the need for verified ground intelligence in July 2007 in Uruzgan province. The SASR pursued a high-ranking Taliban commander. Conventional patrols failed due to noise. The Australians were inserted miles away at night, marching across jagged terrain with 60-kilogram packs. They established an overwatch position and remained motionless for 14 days, enduring heat, cold, and isolation. On the 15th day, the target entered the monitored intersection. Coordinates were relayed to an aircraft, and a precision munition eliminated him. The patrol remained concealed for 3 more days, observing aftermath and mapping responses. After 35 days in hostile territory, they returned without casualties, having fired no personal weapons. An American liaison officer remarked that such psychological control exceeded normal human limits. An Australian commander summarized the philosophy: "You have the technology. We have the time." The Taliban understood mechanized warfare, having fought the Soviets. They listened for diesel engines, tracked helicopter shadows, and monitored radio signals, building early warning systems around noise and predictability. The Australians denied every trigger. They avoided roads, maintained radio silence, inserted far from targets, and moved slowly, eliminating acoustic signatures. A 2009 case illustrates this discipline. An observation post was placed 120 meters above a fortified insurgent village. Taliban fighters, sensing surveillance, swept the slope and passed within 15 meters of concealed operators, who remained perfectly still under netting. The fighters found nothing. Such stillness was forged in brutal selection. Training candidates lay motionless in full gear for 8 hours. Any voluntary movement meant failure. Instructors described shaping not just soldiers, but a silent monastic order. Yet perfection carried hidden cost. Physical strain from 60-kilogram loads and prolonged deprivation was severe. But psychological damage proved deeper. Weeks of isolation, meters from lethal threat, required suppressing fear and emotion. Veterans described becoming biological functions of the mission, returning home unable to switch off. Hypervigilance persisted. Support network data later showed alarming rates of depression, alcoholism, and complex post-traumatic stress. Within this elite community, suicidal thoughts and actions appeared at 2.5 times the national average. Military psychologists explained that brains, conditioned for constant lethal expectation, struggle to regain peace. In 2020, heavily redacted government inquiry documented serious violations of armed conflict laws, including allegations of executing unarmed prisoners and civilians during chaotic raids. The revelations shocked Australia, linking legendary precision with disturbing ethical failures. The same isolation and pressure that forged operational excellence had distorted moral boundaries. This raises a painful question. Where is the line between creating the most effective reconnaissance force on Earth and pushing minds beyond natural limits until they fracture? Long-range patrol doctrine required invisibility, silence, and suppression of human needs. That perfection altered campaigns in Afghanistan, but the cost was paid in broken lives, families, and eyes. Moral injury. By 2010, American command structures began integrating SISR methodologies into elite units, including Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. General Stanley McChrystal publicly acknowledged that extreme patience could be as powerful as firepower. Patrol durations extended to weeks, emphasizing observation over reaction. By 2018, principles of Australian long-range patrols were incorporated into manuals across 15 NATO-allied armies, yet mass-producing equipment differs from cultivating generational hunters. The Australian method was cultural apprenticeship refined over decades, not a checklist replicated quickly. Endurance and psychological resilience. cannot be issued from supply depots. Veterans offered a bitter reflection. The coalition learned patience, while the Taliban had always possessed empires, were endured not defeated by superior technology, but by the capacity to wait. Billions were spent and thousands of lives lost to realize the decisive mountain advantage was the ability to outweight the opponent. At its core, the long-range patrol was never about heroics or confrontation. A veteran instructor summarized the craft. Despite camouflage discipline and weeks in the dirt, they were not striving to be invisible. They were striving to be uninteresting.